Welcome, everyone, to this explainer. So, I want you to imagine for just a second that we're on the set of a mid-century game show. But the grand prize, it's not a new car, and it's definitely not a shiny new refrigerator. The prize is literally ultimate power over society. The name of the game? Who gets to rule? It's a question that has completely defined human history. But, as our modern world gets faster and infinitely more complex, the old answers, well, they're starting to look a little worn out. So today, we're going to explore some fascinating and honestly, sometimes pretty radical alternatives for the very future of governance. To really set the stage for our journey today, consider this thought-provoking quote from political scientist Elaine Landemore. She asks, if government is for the people, why can't the people do the governing? It sounds like a simple, maybe almost innocent question, right? But man, when you actually unpack it, it challenges the absolute foundation of how we pick our leaders and how we make our laws. I want you to think about your own life and the decisions that directly affect your community. If our current system of political theater isn't working perfectly, if it feels, a bit disconnected or just endlessly polarized, who else could actually run the show? Could we just hand the keys over to a supercomputer? How about a panel of scientists? Or what about a totally random lottery of your neighbors? So, here is our roadmap for today. 1. The theater of modern politics. 2. Technocracy, rule by experts. 3. Sortition, power to everyday people. 4. Weighing the alternatives. And finally, 5. Who should decide? Okay, let's dive right into Section 1, the theater of modern politics. So political rhetoric has literally always adapted to the dominant media of its time. If you go back to the 18th century British Parliament, politicians were circulating written pamphlets trying to control the public narrative of their speeches. Jumping forward to that era between, say, 1960 and 2010, the whole battleground shifted to these really slick televised debates. Staging, lighting, camera angles, that's what defined a candidate's legitimacy. And today, in our modern era, that entire broadcasting system has just completely fractured into social media echo chambers. Politicians can now bypass traditional debates altogether and speak directly and exclusively to their own followers. The crucial takeaway here is that the medium fundamentally shapes the message. Research into how the media covers political debates, like the 2015 UK election, for example, shows this really stark contrast. The media is obsessed with the process. They immediately want to declare winners and losers. They focus heavily on personality, appearance, even gender stereotypes. But true governance, that actually requires deep, nuanced, and, let's be honest, often kind of boring policy discussions. The media's constant need for an entertaining clash just strips away the room for actual substantive debate, which really begs the question, if this theater isn't working for us, what are our alternatives? That brings us to Section 2, Technocracy, Rule by Experts. So, if politics is too messy, too emotional, and too performative, should we just hand the keys to society over to those who know the science best? Well, technocracy is defined as a system of governance in which experts and specialists, rather than elected politicians, make decisions based on knowledge, data, and technical expertise. The core idea here is to completely remove subjective politics, partisan rhetoric, and ideology from the equation. Period. Instead of politicians arguing over healthcare, doctors would just design the system. Instead of debating infrastructure budgets, engineers would simply build the most efficient model. In a truly technocratic mindset, society is engineered almost like a highly complex machine. Its core principles rely heavily on the scientific method, literally testing and measuring policies like they're lab experiments. It totally values efficiency and optimization. Plus, it allows for actual long-term planning, looking decades ahead instead of constantly stressing over the next short-term election cycle. Ultimately, it aims for the absolute depoliticization of governance. But, of course, there are trade-offs. We have to be realistic here. On the plus side, technocracy offers truly evidence-based policies. It allows for rapid, data-driven crisis management, which, we definitely saw glimpses of during the global pandemic, and it fosters rapid innovation. However, the cons are pretty significant. It creates a massive democratic deficit. It breeds elitism by concentrating all the power among the highly educated. And maybe most importantly, it suffers from what we call value blindness. Because actually not all societal issues are just technical math problems, right? Many are deeply ethical and cultural, and they require a human touch that pure raw data just cannot provide. Which leads us to Section 3, Sortition, Power to Everyday People. So, if rule by elites isn't the perfect silver bullet, would you trust a random lottery of your everyday neighbors to write the laws of the land? This concept is called sortition, and today it's most often realized as a citizens' assembly. It's defined as a group of people selected by lottery from the general population to deliberate on important public questions. Now, I know this might sound like some wild, brand new experiment, but it actually has ancient roots. Back in Athenian democracy, the use of random lotteries, which were drawn using these complex machines to avoid corruption, was actually considered more democratic than elections. To the ancient Greeks, elections were seen as oligarchic, basically just favoring the rich and famous. Okay, so how does a modern citizens' assembly actually work? Well, it follows a really careful step-by-step process. First, thousands of invitations get sent out completely at random to the public. Second, from the folks who actually respond, the group is stratified. That just means it's mathematically balanced to perfectly match the demographics of the wider population. We're talking age, gender, education, geography, the whole mix. Third, this perfectly representative mini-public sits down to deeply deliberate with subject matter experts. And finally, they make their decisions very often using a secret ballot. That way they can just vote their conscience without any outside public pressure. And if you're sitting there thinking this is just some fringe idea, consider this number, 733. That is the number of modern citizens' assemblies identified worldwide by the OECD just between 1979 and 2023. We are literally seeing these assemblies tackle massive, highly complex issues that regular politicians often completely avoid because of election risks. They've been used for climate change policy in France, electoral reform in Canada, and they even paved the way for major constitutional changes in Ireland. When we evaluate this model, the pros are honestly fascinating. Studies consistently show that a group with high cognitive diversity, meaning people coming from radically different walks of life, often totally outperform homogeneous groups of highly intelligent experts. It relies on the wisdom of the crowd. It breaks political polarization because, well, regular people aren't trying to score cheap points for a camera. And it completely neutralizes lobbyist money and special interests. On the flip side, critics make a fair point. If we replaced elections with lotteries, the wider public might feel completely disengaged. There's a real fear of shallow general participation and a lack of accountability. After all, you can't exactly vote a randomly selected citizen out of office, can you? Moving on to Section 4, weighing the alternatives. Now, what's really interesting about this direct comparison is how it exposes what each system actually values most. In a technocracy, your power comes strictly from your technical knowledge. In our current democracy, your power comes from the popular vote, your ability to win over the masses. In a meritocracy, it's based on talent or achievement. When we look at the primary goals, it's basically a choice between prioritizing efficiency and sustainability, prioritizing representation and freedom of choice, or prioritizing the rewarding of capability. You can clearly see how a society really has to step back and carefully decide what its core values actually are. And finally, Section 5, who should decide? The overarching takeaway here is the fundamental trade-off we face today as modern citizens. Do we lean towards efficiency and elite expertise, recognizing that the problems of the 21st century, things like climate change and artificial intelligence, might just require a level of technical mastery that the average voter simply doesn't possess? Or do we lean towards representativeness and cognitive diversity, trusting that ordinary people, given the right time, the right information, and the right setting, possess the collective wisdom to govern themselves fairly and ethically? The reality is, the future is probably going to be some hybrid of these systems. But the fundamental question remains for you to ponder. As our world gets more complex, more technologically advanced, and more rapidly changing, who do you want writing the rules? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep asking the big questions, and I'll see you next time.